So I absolutely loved Justice League and RWBY, Superheroes and the Huntsmen Part 1, and I was so looking forward to seeing what they were going to do with Part 2, as I thought Part 1 was absolutely extraordinary, absolutely epic, and one of the best animated movies that I have seen in such a long time. However, I don't feel like Part 2 is able to match Part 1, as Part 1 was just so good, which is a little bit disappointing. But anyway, in Part 2, we have this time the RWBY characters are entering into the Justice League world, and once again, we have Kilgore being one of the villains from a Justice League side, teaming up with a villain from the RWBY side, and we get to see what nefarious things then take place. As we are in the DC world this time, we have a couple of new DC characters. For example, Black Canary from a Justice League perspective, and lots of Flash villains. So we have Weather Wizard and Mirror Master, and from a Batman perspective, we also have Killer Croc, and we have the RWBY Grimm villains returning once again, causing absolute anarchy and absolute destruction all over the world. So of course the characters have to stop the Grimm and also figure out what on earth is going on. Herein lies one of the major issues for me, as the Grimm are just not interesting at all. And I feel like all of the interesting aspects of the storyline in terms of what on earth is really going on were just covered so much better in Part 1. So it just meant that unfortunately from a storyline perspective, Part 2 just wasn't able to match up. However, what I did really love is the animation style. The characters just look so cute, as of course it is all of the DC characters as you know and love them, but it just has a bit of an infusion with Japanese anime, and this time the RWBY characters are entering into this DC aesthetic, which looks really cool, as of course in the first film we had the DC characters entering into the RWBY aesthetic, and all the fight sequences are really brilliant. Again, I'm going to sound like an absolute broken record, but I much preferred the action sequences in Part 1, but I have to say at least in Part 2 they were able to make them pretty wicked too. And of course seeing the Flash having a lot of PTSD from having Kilgore in his mind for so long was just explored really well. And of course Kilgore can go from any character to any character, so to see him jumping between RWBY characters and DC characters was a pretty cool sequence too. It does focus a little bit more on the DC characters from a storyline perspective, but all of the interrelationships between all of the RWBY characters was explored really nicely. It's a shame that they don't have as much dust superpower in the DC world, as of course that's a RWBY exclusive. Hopefully they get around it in the final act in a really clever way. And then because of that, I feel like the RWBY character sequences from an animation battle perspective are so cool. But ultimately for me, I just feel like the storyline and the characters and just the writing in general just was not as good as it could have been and should have been, especially as Part 1 was just absolutely extraordinary. Ultimately, I just felt a little bit let down and disappointed, as I just feel like they could have just made this storyline so much more compelling, and it felt a little bit lazy in points, as I just felt like they could have and should have just made it so much better, and they really did have the opportunity and potential to make it absolutely extraordinary. And so for all of those reasons, I'm going to give Justice League and RWBY Superheroes and the Huntsmen Part 2 a 4.5 out of 10. Now I'd love to hear what you thought of this, so please let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video.